Hi, welcome to the Personal History Hub. This video is all about treatments and caring for the sick during the Renaissance. So, how were people treated in Renaissance England? Bleeding and purging. So, bleeding and purging was still very common medical treatment and also continued to be used to prevent illness. Physicians still believed in the theory of the four humours, that people became ill when the humours in the body were out of balance. Therefore, they used bleeding and purging to correct the balance, even though they must have weakened the patients considerably, as you saw with the treatment of Charles II. European travels to America and Asia brought new ingredients for treatments to England. Rhubarb from Asia was widely used to purge the bowels, and ipecacuanha from Brazil was prescribed for dysentery and used to make people vomit. Herbal remedies. Herbal remedies were handed down through generations from mother to daughter. Girls learned how to mix up remedies using ingredients such as honey, which we now know kills some bacteria. More people were writing down home remedies because more people could now read and write. Mary Doggett, wife of a London actor, noted a remedy for scurvy, which used horseradish roots, white wine, water, and a quart of orange juice, or 12 thinly cut oranges. We know that scurvy, which leads to internal bleeding and death, is the result of not eating enough fruit and vegetables. Mary did not know this, but she did know from experience that this remedy worked. Less helpfully, tobacco from America was greeted as a cure-all, being recommended for toothache, poison wounds, joint pains, and a protection from plague. So the printing revolution meant that more people had books in their homes containing advice on herbal remedies. One of the most popular was Nicholas Culpeper's Complete Herbal, which recommended simple homegrown herbal remedies. So God and the King. Between 1660 and 1682, over 92,000 people visited the King's court, believing that if Charles II touched them, they would be cured from scrofula, a skin disease known as the King's Evil. The king was God's representative on earth, so being touched by the king was as close as you could get to being touched by God. There are records of people travelling from as far as Bamborough in Northumberland in the hope that the king's touch would heal them. Many treatments seem rational and would have helped the sick person. However, the treatment below, published in a book called The New London Dispensary in 1682, shows that people still use cures based on magic. Such ideas must have been used because people were desperate for help. To cure malaria, take the hair and nails of a patient, cut them small and either give them to birds in a roasted egg or put them in a hole in an oak tree or a plane tree. Stop up the hole with a peg of the same tree. In fact, a new cure for malaria had arrived when the bark of the coconut tree was imported from South America because it treated fevers effectively. It became known as quinine and helped many who suffered from malaria. So, how were the sick cared for? Let's look at change and continuity from the Middle Ages. Let's start with hospitals. So, some changes had begun to take place in English hospitals by the early 16th century. Before this time, only the elderly, travellers, and a few sick people would have attended hospitals for food, shelter, and prayer. During the 1500s, this began to change. Patient records suggest that many people went to hospital with wounds and curable diseases such as fevers and skin conditions. They didn't spend very long in the hospital before being discharged. This suggests that they did get better. A patient in a 16th century hospital could expect a good diet. The restorative effects of food were still important as many people didn't have access to a lot of food that was good for them. A visit from a physician. Hospitals had contracts with doctors who would visit the patient sometimes as often as twice a day to observe the symptoms and prescribe treatments. Medication. Many hospitals had their own pharmacies and an apothecary to mix the medicines. However, the dissolution of the monasteries, so the shutting down of the monasteries in England by Henry VIII, dramatically changed the availability of hospital care in England. Since the majority of hospitals were connected to the church, very few were able to stay open after the monasteries were shut down. St Bartholomew's Hospitals in London survived because Henry VIII refounded it himself in 1546. Some smaller hospitals opened to fill the gap left, and they were usually funded by charities, but there was a big change in the amount of medical treatment provided by hospitals. Many hospitals reopened with religious sponsors, and it took a long time for the amount of hospitals to return to what it had been before the monasteries were closed. So pest houses, what are they? One change in hospital care at this time in the period was the appearance of hospitals that specialised in one particular disease. There was a growing understanding that disease could be transmitted from person to person, even though they didn't know why. Consequently, new hospitals started to appear that catered only for people suffering from plague or pox. They were known as pest houses, plague houses, and pox houses. These new types of hospital provided a much needed service as traditional hospitals would not let in infectious people. And then finally, community care. So in spite of changes to hospitals, most sick people continued to be cared for at home. Local communities were very close-knit, which meant that there were plenty of people around to give advice and make remedies. Women continued to play an important role in the care of the sick, and Lady Grace Mildmay kept detailed notes of the healing and treatment she carried out. Many poor women in big cities mixed and sold simple herbal remedies to purge the body. They were very popular, probably because they were cheaper than got to a physician or apothecary. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the Regional History Hub.